Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio podcast, brought to you by your hosts Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
What's up, brother?
It's great to see you.
Great to see you as well.
And you remember Derek, right? Derek Hansen?
I do. How you doing, man?
Good. I'm wearing my Saskatchewan Rough Rider shirt for you to bring on Canada here.
Go Saskatchewan.
Crazy.
He said it, Don. You owe me $20.
I love it. So Shawn, so you're still you're in LA, right?
Yeah. When I saw you when we last talked, I lived in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where I'm born and raised.
Right.
So we moved out here just in time for all this crazy shit to happen.
How you enjoying it out there?
I don't know. It's just been crazy since I've been here. So I really haven't even gotten out. We actually just are moving into my studio here today. The people are installing the set. So, we recorded at a studio in Santa Monica for years when I would come into town to speak or whatever. And so when we moved here, that was just kind of like my home spot. But then the building got shut down and, it's just been this whole thing. So we were going to build a set maybe in 2 years, but it just like forced me to do the thing. So I'm pumped about it, but I really haven't been anywhere, man. Like, I don't know. It's nice. It's always sunny. That's a positive.
It's a very nice place to be. And for those of you, most people I know listening to this are going to know who you are, which is kind of ironic. And how Derek and I normally roll is we just roll into it. Like, this has got to be just a relaxed, fun conversation. And it's just something that we've been doing and we love doing. It's a lot of fun. But I was speaking to a friend of mine this morning. Her name's Beth Gardula. Went to college with this woman. And I haven't connected with her in probably, 6-7 years, maybe. But she heard me on your show I guess you did that little edit that you were telling me about. And she just starts going off about you on how much she loves following you, loves listening to you. And I was like, listen, I'm just curious. Like, give me a little context on that. I always like kind of diving in a little bit. And she's like, it's amazing how he could take stuff that could be so complex and so overwhelming, but break it down into a fashion that's so relatable and so enjoyable to digest, no pun intended. And I think besides you being an incredibly knowledgeable person in so many different areas, nutrition being one of them, sleep, right? Even from you run one of the top podcasts in the world, right? Correct. I mean, you're dipping your hands into a lot of different things. And I think it's really impressive. So I'd love you just to kind of, how did you give everyone who doesn't know who you are, how'd you get started? Talk about your background a little bit. And then I want to roll into something that I'm really impressed with. And it's this.
Thank you so
that I've been
much,
highly recommending lately. So Shawn Stevenson, everyone.
That means so much, man. Thank you so much. Yeah. So I'm a clinical nutritionist. That's what I've been really interested in food for the past almost 20 years now. And the whole sleep phenomenon, Sleep Smarter came out as the first international best-selling book on the topic of sleep wellness. And many people were trying to talk me out of it, agents and publishers. It's like, I don't know. But once it came out, it really created a shift in the market. And this was about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And since then, many sleep wellness books have come out and done really, really well. The conversation is now top of mind for folks. And this is the power of an idea. And that's what I wanted to start by saying. I could just say, I'm a guy from St. Louis, Missouri, which is not known to be a health hub by any stretch of the imagination, being from the heartland and running my clinical practice. But I saw that there's a gap. We can get somebody's nutrition dialed in and their movement practices, but if they're not sleeping well, we're really missing out on so much of the things that really regulate what food does in the body, regulate what exercise does in the body. And so I want to address all pieces of what makes health. And so I think that that's one of the things that kind of shot me up as far as like the podcast and the books is it's really just a cohesive understanding of what health is. Whereas our conventional paradigm, unfortunately, has gotten more and more of this kind of separatist attitude. Everything is really getting isolated into parts. When you are a dynamic, whole, interconnected human being, and so it's great to be able to dial in to look at the minutia, but we also have to zoom out and look at the meta perspective. And so being a nutritionist, and this is the thing too, there are many paths to the goal of health. So for some folks, it's through the lane of exercise. For some folks, it's through, mindset or, personal development. For me, it was food. Food isn't just food, it's information. And when I started to upgrade the things I was putting into my body, not only did I reverse a so-called incurable spinal condition that I was dealing with when I was 20, but it changed the way that I saw reality. Like my brain started working differently, and at the time I lived in Ferguson, Missouri, while I was in college, so I was commuting into the university, not that far away. And I started to see opportunities where I really just kind of grew up in conditions where it was just a lot of deprivation, a lot of restriction. But I started to see the good that was around me all the time at the same time. I started to see a lot more solutions that were present all the time as well. And so really it just came from a passion to wanting to share the things that I was learning with myself. And then once I opened my clinical practice that I was seeing with the patients that I was working with, at some point after doing that one-on-one, and this as well, Don, you just feel like more people need to know this, And so I was like, let me record some of this stuff. Let me start writing some of this stuff down so that now in one of my greatest, the thing that really it's even hard for me to talk about, I'm so grateful for this, is that I'm able to influence influencers. I'm able to teach teachers and to create this trickle down effect of change. I just did a guest lecture for the neuroscience department at NYU, speaking at Google, all those different things where I'm impacting people that then impact other people. And that's what, if we're talking about big transformation, which we'll talk about today, we really, really need it right now. For me, that's what it's really all about.
Before Derek jumps in, you used a really interesting word when it comes down to sleep and nutrition, and use this word integrated. And what's kind of funny about, I think, the world we live in now, everyone thinks something's going to be fixed with one thing. It's like, oh, well, magnesium, that'll improve my sleep. I'm like, it might, right? It might, but you're really talking about how you take a kind of a food, and I love this, by the way, this is what I love about you. One of the things, one of the many, but a food is medicine approach, right? Like you're trying to really get that whole internal power plant to where it's just so powerful and so healthy and so resilient. We're like, energy's high. And if energy's high, then recovery should be good. And if recovery is good, then, well, fat loss should be really good, right? And like all these things are integrated, where I think in society nowadays, it's like, whoa, where should my heart rate be on cardio? I'm like, sometimes it's that simple of an answer, but a lot of times it's not. Can you talk about that? That word integrated, I absolutely loved it.
Sure. And this is, for me, this is what ropes people in a big way, is when you can identify the thing that they're interested in and then tying it to everything else, because it's always tied to everything else. So one of the things that I talked about and really helping to get Sleep Smarter out and to kind of change the paradigm on that is how it affects our body composition specifically. And there's so much data on this stuff. It's insane, but most folks don't know. And so one of the things, and I'll just throw this out there really quickly, but there was a study conducted by researchers at the University of Chicago. And what they wanted to do was find out how our sleep might impact fat loss. And so they put folks onto, and they were on a, very regimented, tracking their caloric intake, which we definitely have to talk about this in a little bit. But anyway, so they're tracking their caloric intake, but one phase of the study, they allow them to get 8.5 hours of sleep, and they want to see what happened with their fat loss. And so another phase of the study, so it was a 2-week study period, another phase of the study for another 2 weeks, they sleep deprive them. And now they're taking away 3 hours. So now they're getting 5.5 hours of sleep, and they compiled all the data. And what they found was that when folks were getting adequate sleep, they lost 55% more body fat. Didn't change their diet, their exercise, just changing their sleep, because it's integrated. Your sleep is a major controller or regulator of your metabolism. And that was one of those really powerful insights. But here's the thing I don't often talk about, and I got to share this with you guys. When the folks in the study were in the sleep deprived state, when they still lost weight, but they lost 60% more fat-free mass. So they were losing muscle when they were sleep deprived as well. And what does that do long-term? How does that set us up long-term? It's another one of those reasons where people lose weight and they gain it back. Their body composition is changing and they're losing muscle. And so who knew that sleep deprivation could do something like that? And so, the list goes on and on and on the data that we have around this. So because again, health is so integrated, your exercise has a massive influence on your sleep quality, for example. And I might have talked about this with you guys last time. One of the greatest markers of that was, for me, it's this really simple study. It was done by researchers at Appalachian State University. They wanted to find out what time of day people exercise. Does that have an impact on sleep? And they had folks that trained exclusively at 7 a.m. for one phase, exclusively at 1 p.m. for another phase, and exclusively at 7 p.m. for another phase. And by the way, full caveat, exercise is great regardless, all right? I mean, you probably don't want to exercise right before you go to sleep, but it's more so like, what is the impact that it has on sleep? And what they found was that folks who exercise in the morning tend to have more efficient sleep cycles. They tend to sleep longer in deep anabolic sleep, and they also tend to sleep longer. This isn't true across the board, but on average, that's what we see. And what that is just kind of tied into evolutionary biology. With the way that we are designed, like we're wired up as humans to seek shelter, keep it safe at night, get up early, get out, get your hunting done, your foraging, whatever the case might be. Cortisol levels are going to be up, and then it gradually declines through the day. And that's kind of our natural cortisol rhythm as humans. So this is why exercise plays right into that. And so this is one of the tactics that I would use in my clinical practice for folks that had what we call tired and wired, where their cortisol is too low in the morning and it's high in the evening. And so to help them to normalize and kind of reset, and I use that word judiciously, reset their cortisol rhythm, was to get them to do some exercise in the morning. So again, all of these things are integrated. We could talk about how our nutrition impacts our sleep. It's one of the most important things because, and I'll share this last little bit and pass it back to you. I've pushed this into the market, blackout curtains, cool environment, all the things, but it doesn't matter if you're not giving your body the raw materials, the building blocks that it needs to make your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters, which is coming from food. And so if you're deficient, these key nutrient deficiencies that I saw time and time again, you can have the fanciest, pansiest mattress, posturepedic, orthopedic, superpedic pillow, you can have all the things. But if you don't have these bases covered, because again, it's integrated, your diet affects your sleep affects your diet, then we're really missing the point.
Eric?
What is the line that you walk in terms of being philosophical about these things and being scientific about these things when you're talking to people? Because sometimes we got the hard science people and talking about measuring stuff and this, all the details versus like, what about your life philosophy? I just noticed that was today would have been Anthony Bourdain's birthday, right? He would have been 65 or something like that. And I saw something on him and they said, well, you're so skinny, but you're always eating. And he said, well, I'm very careful about like the quality of food I eat. I don't eat sweets. If I know I'm going to have a big meal, I compensate for not eating over here. And it was more of like a philosophical approach as opposed to being scientific. And it worked for him from a body composition point of view. But how do you know when to dip into each of those sides?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. You guys are awesome. That's a great question.
Thank you.
So the number one thing for me, and I think that that's what's needed right now at this current day and age, where we're inundated with data, but we're kind of lacking in knowledge. And I think that what that really means is a lot of folks are skimming, like they're getting the headline, they're getting little pieces, but I'm a very analytical thinker by nature. And so my tendency is to really dig deep, to look at different things, to think about things from multiple perspectives, to run thought experiments, to run experiments in my clinical practice, to run experiments on myself. It's just kind of how I'm wired up, is to think more in the vein of science. And so by nature, there's some nurture in there too, but I'm a scientist first. But I know, and here's the rub, and why I can connect with people on the philosophical side, is that there's so much that we don't know. And I think that our level of intelligence here in our society is just knowing enough for us to have conversations. But at some point, many of the things that we know to be true become irrelevant, or they can sometimes become the complete opposite. It just really depends on the perspective. So to answer that question, me coming into it first, I'm looking at it through the lens of science, and we can do all the self-quantification. And I love that stuff, so I've seen this now. It's like it's a pattern, and I've seen it, folks. One of my things, I take this data And this is going back to, the beginning of my show and even previous to that. What I would do, I think, is kind of see myself like a DJ with information, and so taking it and making it fun, making it make sense for people, taking these complex things, which are oftentimes unnecessarily complex, and making them make sense. But it's all from the lens of science. And so going back to my original point, with all the data that we have, again, we're inundated with that. And also folks are just distracted, period. So we have to have things that are sticky, that are hard hitting, punchy, for folks to walk away with. But on the other side, and this is the last part to the answer, I think at the end of the day, when it really boils down to it, we still have to look at the most important metric, which is ignored in our science. And this is really one of the biggest things. Objective measurements are incredible for communication today, where people want to see the numbers. But name something more powerful than how you feel. Name something that's more important metric of how things are going than how you feel. You can't. But it's really looked past in science. As a matter of fact, it's an epidemic right now of people being ignored or downplayed for the way that they're feeling, because we can't find something objectively. And then sometimes it's years later, then we find out the thing, and somebody's life is finally changed, where again, they're being led to believe that they're just, being hypersensitive, they're making things up, whatever the case might be. So I'm a big proponent of, yes, we can get some objective data, but I also want people to be able to tune into their own bodies and to really just see how they feel. How do you look? How do you perform? What is your energy? The reason that we can't do that, though, is because today, again, we're so pulled out to this external objective information, and so much distraction that pulls us away from the most important guidance system that we have.
It also comes off sounding a little simple. I mean, wouldn't you agree? And I think a lot of people who jump into that situation, they're already coming to you in a vulnerable position. They're already feeling a bit insecure about the fact that whatever they've been trying in the past probably doesn't work. It probably hasn't worked. And I don't want to say get a kick out of it, but anytime someone approaches me and they're like, what do you think of this diet and that diet? And I'm like, they're like, how do you eat? And I'm like, I eat healthy whole foods. Like there's no real name to how I eat. Well, I did the ketogenic diet and I worked. And I'm like, well, how are you quantifying work? Well, I lost 20 pounds. I'm like, well, did it stay off? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, it didn't really work then, didn't it? Right. It's like, we have to, you're speaking to me right now because there's something that's missing. But you mentioned something and it opened my eyes to the process. You have a process. And it seems very like I love the fact that you are somewhat data driven, but you also go off a feel and you understand the importance of both. But the main complaint of people out there is that they just want it, right? They're like it when they try and commit to something, they get on for a few days and they struggle and they fall off. So how good is the best plan in the world if someone can't execute it? What is your process? Can you talk about that a bit when you're sitting with someone who has clearly done this, right? And they clearly can't stick to the plan. What is your recommendation? What is your process? How do you tell people to maybe take a step back and say, wait a second, let's hit the reset button here. You're just approaching this a little bit incorrectly.
Look, for me, and this might seem Captain Obvious, but the number one thing that I would do is to get folks interested in the first place, like really get them interested in how their body works, really get them tuning back into their own inner dialogue, their own inner feedback, and getting them excited about food and how their body works. And so that's what the majority of my time would be in my clinical practice. I knew folks are going in oftentimes for a 5 to 10 minute physician visit and then leaving with, they've got their statin, they've got their lisinopril, they've got their whole list of things. And oftentimes, again, they're not being educated about how did I get in this situation in the first place? So once I got people's light turned on, a lot of the work got done for itself. And even today, there's so many people that I worked with years ago that they're doing even far better than when we were together because those seeds were planted in a really kind of inspiring and deep-seated way. But here's the rub. It still has to be catered to the person because people's motivations are different, so a lot of my time was actually spent asking questions. And again, this should kind of seem Captain Obvious, but I think a lot of times when we have a certain level of knowledge base. We just want to give people our thing. We want to tell people how it is and for them to adapt to it. And so one of the biggest mistakes that I made in my practice, and even when I was a strength and conditioning coach in college, was if I'm into something, that's what you're going to be into. If something's working for me, it's the best thing and you're going to do it and it's going to work for you. Whether it's a vegan diet, a keto diet, if I'm into it, you're going to do it. And because it's the best thing. But thankfully, after a few years, it took a few years, and I had to be honest. Are people getting the results consistently? And are they able to maintain the results? If not, it's not their fault. It's something here in my education. And again, there is, of course, personal responsibility, of course. Let's not negate that. But if people are following the plan, a lot of times, and you know this as well, sometimes we just have this tendency to think people are lying. If it's not working and we know it's working for everybody else, that's our tendency. And that's unfortunate because a lot of times people are working their ass off to get that weight off or to get their blood pressure normalized. But so what I did eventually, and this is what Eat Smarter is really about, is understanding that everybody is different. Every single human being on planet Earth has a unique metabolic fingerprint. Everybody. And our metabolism, that metabolic fingerprint that we have today, is not only different from every person on the planet, but it's different from ourselves tomorrow. Our metabolism is incredibly fluid and constantly changing. And there are components that make up that metabolic fingerprint, including our genetics, including our microbiome, including things that have become buzzwords today that, again, I've been just really not just researching these things, but applying these things in clinical practice. And also so grateful I have the opportunity to work with some of the best people in the world in these respective fields to really, like, I just had at my place, was it last week or the week before, Dr. Emery Mayer out of UCLA, who's been studying the microbiome for 40 years. 40 years. So when he was talking about your microbiome influencing your metabolism and your immune system 30 years ago, people thought he was nuts. Like, what is this guy doing in his lab? And he's crazy. And now, well, come to find out, all the things that he was trying to communicate with his peers, that he was trying to communicate with the patients he was working with, it's all come to pass. And now this is the hottest thing that folks are thinking about. So the last piece here is, with that metabolic fingerprint, again, genetics, microbiome, but also your current state of health is going to affect what diet is best for you right now. And that is inherently going to change. You might absolutely crush it, as you mentioned, with the keto diet. But when it stops working, we have to give ourselves permission to adjust, because that diet framework can become the very thing that imprisons us. And so Eat Smarter is really the antithesis of a cookie cutter diet. It's giving people the keys to understand how their metabolism works, giving them permission to adjust when they and adapt when they need to, and also giving them a plethora of various foods that have peer-reviewed evidence on them being effective for whatever the case might be, whether it's cognitive performance, whether it's metabolic function, whatever the case, disease prevention. So we've got data on this, but we've got to make it attractive. We've got to make people feel empowered, and we've got to help people to cater it to their own unique metabolism.
Derek?
Shawn, when do you obviously you work with a lot of different people, a lot of different experts in different disciplines. When do you think things can go off the rails when people try to use diet as a tool for everything? Like, I'm going to fix it with diet. So I've got a skin problem. I have mental health issues. I may have cancer, right? And people are like, I'm going to go on this diet. And when do you go, wait a minute, let's look at a bigger picture here and see if we're doing the right thing?
Just yesterday, I talked with a friend of mine who, him and his wife are some of the most sought after experts in business and marketing, specifically in fitness and health. Like, they're just, they're at an elite level that I don't think anybody else compares with as far as a husband and wife. And recently they've been under a lot of stress. They're taking care of a family member with Alzheimer's, and he's doing all the things, the husband, his fitness is on point, his nutrition is on point, but he had some traumatic thing happen while he was working out. Just wasn't even anything intense, but suddenly the lower half of his body went completely numb, lost all sense of touch and sensation. And it just stayed like that for several days. And of course, you like immediately, I'm like, there had to be a trauma there, something like that. But what it really boiled down to, and he got to work with this incredible expert on who really dials in, focuses on the nervous system, who's worked with, Manny Pacquiao to Lady Gaga, the list goes on and on. When folks are, and the reason he found him is somebody's like, their son had the same issue, and it was like a year. And when they went to see this guy, finally, within a matter of days, their son was, quote, back to normal. His nervous system was firing correctly. And what he told him right off the bat after analyzing him is that this has nothing to do with your diet. This has nothing to do with the exercise that you just so happen to be doing. All of that was going into your overall stress load. It's your mind. Your mind is literally controlling this whole thing. And so, again, he went to see him, he got 25% better, where for 2 weeks, he didn't have any sensation, with his body. And I think it had moved up to his arms as well. He's like 25% better. And he called me yesterday. He had just left the appointment. He's like, I'm actually 50% better now, but it kind of goes back down a little bit. But he's really working on kind of retraining and strengthening my nervous system. And so what I'm trying to communicate is this: the human mind is the most powerful pharmacy in the known universe, so, and it's making chemicals on demand. Every thought we have has correlating chemistry that's released into our bodies. And so, but the difference is, if we're talking about a pharmaceutical model of something that might affect serotonin, or that might affect, insulin, what you make in you is made for you. So it's not bioidentical, it's identical. It is made, tailor-made for your receptor sites. And so when we negate to understand how powerful our minds are, and everybody knows at this point a little bit, at least, about the placebo effect, it's so effective in clinical trials. Like it has to be accounted for. We have randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, but sure enough, on average, we see placebos working from 30% effectiveness to sometimes 80% effectiveness, depending on what they're going up against in the clinical trial, just based on the belief that this thing is going to lower my blood pressure, that it's going to, reduce my symptoms of depression, whatever the case might be. So yeah, this goes beyond just understanding, yes, our nutrition is incredibly important, but these two have a feedback, because our nutrition can assist in us thinking what we want to think, right? But above all, and truly, what's operating and controlling the majority of this, and I can't state this enough, I really, really get this now the last few years, and working with Dr. Caroline Leaf and her work, and Dr. Daniel Amen, our mind is controlling the whole shebang. So whatever we can do to stack conditions with that, it supersedes everything else, in my opinion.
It does become pretty difficult. I mean, especially in this online world now, when people are asking questions, right? And they're like, well, I'm dealing with this or this with fat loss. And you want to always be able to say here, you want to be able to do that. But there are really so many questions that you have, or we have as coaches, that we just don't have the answers to if you're not dealing with that individual one-on-one, correct? I mean, it's how is the sleep going? What is your digestion like? What are things like at home? I mean, you must have to deal with that a lot, where people are reaching out to you in almost a little bit of a panic, because people come to you when they want good things, but they also come to you when they're in trouble, right? I mean, that's got to be pretty common. I'm in trouble, I'm having pain, I'm having inflammation, something's going on. How do you deal with someone like that virtually, that you're not able to do a deep dive on, where the answer a lot of times becomes, it depends. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It depends. So how do you deal with that? I'm curious on your process there.
You just said it. It is very difficult in a virtual setting, but this is a pretty strong statement, and I think this ratio can change a little bit. But what I found is that about 80% of the issues that people are dealing with, they already know the cause and cure themselves. They already know what it is. And so simply doing a little bit of introspection, like where you will either find out, like if somebody's struggling with their sleep, if I ask them, okay, so they've been, having sleep issues for the past 6 months, and I asked them, so this has been going on for 6 months. Did something happen around that time that might have, it's right there already. And this just happened. I just did a a talk for my buddy Lewis Howe's greatness coaching, and somebody was having some sleep struggles. And I asked that question, and boom, the answer came right up that this thing had changed in their life. And we tend to think that though I just need to get a supplement. I just need, whatever it is, it's some external thing that's going to fix this. When instead of just inquiring, like, what happened in my life that contributed to this thing manifesting? Because I think we get away from basic principles of physics, which unfortunately, it's kind of built into our medical paradigm that something just happened. Like, this is unexplained. We don't know where this thing came from, and I had that said to me when I was 20 years old, and I was starting to have loss of function in my leg, and I go in to see the physician, and I'm used to being an athlete, performing at a high level, and suddenly, like, my leg isn't firing correctly. And he tells me that I have this degenerative disc disease, this advanced severe arthritic condition of my spine when I'm just 20. And he had never seen this happen in a kid before, somebody so young. And for me to have that, it had been happening for years, that degradation, to be 2 herniated discs. They look like thin pieces of fried bologna. They look terrible. My discs look terrible. And I didn't have any connection to what that even means. I'm like, I don't even know why my leg is hurting. Like, this is my spine. Like, why are we even looking at this? And I asked him, does this first, and this is, I actually talk about this a little bit in Eat Smarter, because I have no idea why I asked him this question. I had no grounds to ask this question. But I asked him, does this have anything to do with what I'm eating? And I think actually, let me take that back. There was a tiny seed planted, because I did have one of my nutritional science classes thus far in college before I jumped to a different university. So maybe it was planted there a little bit that my diet does affect my health, but not in a major way. Like, it hadn't really blossomed. And he looked at me like I was from another planet when I asked that question. And he said, this has nothing to do with what you're eating. This is something that just happens. And I'm sorry it happened to you. And the funny thing was, he said, this has nothing to do with what I was eating, but he wrote me a prescription to eat some pills. Of course, it has something to do with what I'm putting in my mouth. And it's the thing that my tissues are made out of. I can go on and on and on. We can get into, nutrition, nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics, genetic expression, all that stuff. But bottom line was this. I was told what so many patients I've worked with are told, which is, this is something that just happens. And nothing in reality just happens. That's abandoning principles of physics. For every action, there's a reaction. And so it's dialing in that, helping people to investigate and find out what are the things that might have, but sometimes it can be, and that's why I'm saying 80%, but sometimes it can be a little bit more stealth. Like what happened with my friend. It wasn't the exercise, it was the stacking, because exercise is a wonderful hormetic stressor. But if you stack that exercise on top of the life stress, on top of the relationship stress, the business stress, something has got to give at some point. Our bodies are kind of hardwired. Our nervous system is hardwired to sustain a certain level of activity and energy. The great news and what's so cool about where we are today is like, we can actually strengthen our nervous system, not just our muscles, to make us more resilient. So I hope that answers the question. It's a really difficult one to answer.
Yeah. Beautiful. And, I know I could put you on the spot a little bit. It's not always this A/B answer. It's not this cut dry answer. And that's what's been interesting for me I've been a fitness professional for almost 25 years now. And I was working primarily in the brick and mortar space and then got into the digital space 10 years ago. And then with the pandemic, made that transition and have been loving it and been enjoying it. But sometimes I think when you really care, you're someone, Shawn, that really cares. Derek really cares. When you don't have that answer and you're like, guys, I need more information here. I think it's something where most of the time people might think you're punting it, like you don't really want to deal with it, but the answer really is the truth. I mean, I feel like you'd be doing more of an injustice if you were just like, here, like take this and that'll fix everything. I almost think that's a little bit irresponsible. But Derek, why don't you jump in, and I wanted to throw a couple more questions at Shawn, and then we'll
can we do like specific nutrition question? And one of the things that I saw recently in the New York Times was they did an article about coffee. And basically it came out on the side of like, hey, this is really good. This is good for mental health. Like there's less reported suicides around people who drink are coffee drinkers, and maybe that's just a correlation, who knows. There's antioxidants, there's all these things. So it seems like, people who drink a couple of cups of coffee a day are doing pretty good. What are your thoughts on coffee?
Wow. He's going to get right into the controversy. It's so crazy that this is even controversial. I always look at like, what have humans been doing for the longest? And humans have been consuming coffee in various forms for centuries. Like it has a really interesting resonance with the human body. I think it really boils down to understanding how it works. And the thing about coffee, and we know about, all the antioxidant content, all this, I think the part that really gets villainized is the caffeine aspect. And the reason that it works, so coffee is a really interesting nervous system stimulant, but as we're going through the day and just doing life stuff, we're building up what was considered to be metabolic waste, which is in the form of adenosine, but it's not just metabolic waste. Come to find out, these adenosine would fit into receptor sites, that as these receptor sites get filled, it starts to nudge us into sleepiness. It starts to make us tired. And so what coffee does is, the funny thing is, caffeine is able to fit into receptor sites for adenosine. So your adenosine that's accumulating, that's kind of trying to nudge you to go to sleep, it's not able to fit into those receptor sites. So basically you are doing the things that would make you tired, but you don't know it. All right. Now that can be a positive and not so positive thing. But to just look at it in that one vein is a little bit, it's a lot. It's dangerous, because we've got to look at things from the whole picture, because it's not just the caffeine that's found within coffee. There are certain compounds that are well noted to improve cardiovascular health. And one of the studies, I think I put in Eat Smarter, actually, looking at longevity. And there's a clear bell-shaped curve with coffee consumption, finding that folks who have a few cups of coffee a day, I believe it's 2 to 4 cups a day, do in fact live significantly longer than people who don't drink coffee. And by the way, this is observational data. And then we can get into observational evidence versus randomized controlled trials. But still, it's something for us to take a good look at. Whereas we get into, if you're drinking, and I've seen it, like I had somebody fly in from another country to see me because he was having all these nervous system issues. He was having, tremors. He was drinking 11 cups of coffee a day. So I get him into St. Louis. We just don't have coffee, and I distract him with something else, and his symptoms go away. And he's just like thinking I'm the greatest thing in the world. And it's just like, bro, like you're like mainlining coffee. Your blood is like 70% coffee now. What do you think is going to happen? But also for folks who don't drink coffee, this isn't saying to run out and drink coffee to add years to your life. It's all the different pieces that are involved there. But the biggest issue with coffee is this: when you're having your cup of coffee, are you also having a piping hot dose of pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides? That unfortunately, this is so common in growing coffee today. All of these chemical residues, it's so freaking dangerous and crazy. What folks don't realize is this isn't just like, again, hearsay, whatever. We've got mountains of science on this now. Pesticides have to be, they're generally neurogenic or estrogenic to either disrupt the reproductive cycle of pests or to damage their nervous system. And one of the most widely used, I actually just wrote something about this and posted it on Instagram yesterday. One of the most widely used commercial, cash crops is corn, which is used for all manner of processed foods, high fructose corn syrup. One of the major pesticides used for corn is chlorpyrifos. And chlorpyrifos, researchers at Columbia University have clearly found that it has created massive upticks in developmental issues for children. So women that are pregnant that are exposed to chlorpyrifos, having the brains of their babies not developing properly, and upticks in miscarriages. It's scary stuff, terrible. There's all these lawsuits, but it's still legal. It's still being used today, and it's actually caught up in red tape. It was actually about to be banned, but these big food manufacturers, it's cheap. It helps the corn to grow to meet their quotas. They don't want to take it out if they don't have to. And you got to ask yourself, this is when they get caught. How many of those things are going on? So, this kind of transitioned away from coffee a little bit, but the bottom line is this, and Don said the word earlier, it's the quality that comes into play, and also doing what's right for your unique metabolic type. Some people, part of that metabolic fingerprint is their caffeine metabolism. Caffeine has a half-life. It could be a 4-hour half-life. It could be an 8-hour half-life. So if you just had 300 milligrams of caffeine, it might take 8 hours for half of it to still be active in your system, and then another 8 hours for half of it to be metabolized. So you can be unconscious, quote, sleeping, but you're not going through your sleep cycle efficiently because that caffeine is still active. So it's a complex topic, but I still just like to lean into the fact that humans have been drinking coffee or consuming coffee in various ways, not just drinking it, for a very, very long time. But it's just our association with it needs to be improved.
Awesome. And I love your answer on it. Now I have to ask this question because everyone's going to be interested. I mean, you are the board of health. You are someone who, practices what he preaches. I mean, you got two, how old are your boys now?
My oldest son is 20 and my youngest son is 9.
Yeah. So they're like, you got some age gap differences there. I mean, Derek, I know Derek's a father also. And so am I, but can you go through your routine, go through your morning routine for us? I know you've been asked this probably a million times, but I know people are really going to be interested on how do you go about starting your day?
Don, you put me on the spot with this one. The thing because I don't want people to think what's best for me is best for them.
It's what you do though. And I'm just, it's interesting. Yeah. It's intriguing. I'm going on record. This is Shawn's routine. What Shawn does might be completely different than what I do. We're not knocking each other. We're just curious.
Yeah, and if there's like a Missouri, California difference here, like are you just like the Rams? You just moved from St. Louis to LA and that's it?
Right. That's the thing. The Rams left us, and then I showed up here as well. But little fun fact: the year when I moved from St. Louis, the St. Louis Blues had just won the championship, and then when I moved to LA, the Dodgers and Lakers won championships. This is observational data right here, but I could be a walking, talking leprechaun.
He's just saying. He's just saying.
Kansas City won the Super Bowl too, right? So there's something there, like in Missouri.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but championships are following me. So for me, the thing that I've been doing for probably, I would say 17 years, the first thing that I do every day, and I've really, again, popularized this. Even the term, many folks have heard this term before, but I've seen this written in like some of my friends' books that are New York Times bestsellers. They've taken this this morning jump start and have employed it, and now it's like really widespread. But the first thing that I do when I wake up in the morning, go to the bathroom, but the first thing that I do is I take what I call an inner bath, and this is drinking for me somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 24 ounces to maybe 30 ounces of water to start the day. And the reason that I do that is, and it's a multi-layered, but it's very, very important and very powerful. This is the longest time that you go without consuming water, because you're asleep. And so you are inherently dehydrated when you get up, and you can even see your urine is more concentrated. And so when you're sleeping, your body is building up, I mean, my goodness, trillions of processes have taken place over the time when you're asleep. And so now you have all these metabolic waste products that literally need to get flushed out of your system. And so getting up and having that intake, that inner bath, helps to literally flush out all these metabolic waste products and get your inner environment a little bit cleaner. So that's the number one thing that I do. But plus, and I broke this down in Eat Smarter, so important. This is the chapter where we dive in and talk about, because unfortunately, we've been inundated with this concept of these 3 macronutrients: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. But there's 5 major macronutrients. Alcohol and water is also another macronutrient. Water's often not included because it's considered to be a non-caloric macronutrient. But the way that it impacts your body's ability to manage and modulate calories is out of this world, in a league of its own, because there's something called water-induced thermogenesis. All right, so water-induced thermogenesis. What the researchers did was they had folks consume this 17 ounces of water just within a couple of minutes to see what it did to their metabolism. And within about 30 minutes, they had an uptick in their metabolic rate and their burning of quote calories, energetic energy stored energy of about 30 calories were burned just from drinking water, right? Of 17 ounces. But here's the thing that's often overlooked is that this maintains kind of uptake in their metabolic rate for a significant time after drinking that water as well. And the question is why? How could drinking something without calories help you to burn calories? Well, it just makes everything work better because everything happening in your body with your metabolism is happening in a water medium. All right. So not only do you get the benefit of, cleaning out these metabolic wastes, water-induced thermogenesis, but again, it's just going back to the principle that the body's primarily, made of water. And we say that shit, but we really don't often get it and employ it. And I think that plus two, we get busy in our days. This is a great time when you first wake up to just knock out a nice chunk of your water needs before the day kind of gets ahead of you. And then after that, and I'll just hit these really quickly. After that, I do some meditation. I've been meditating for probably 16 years now. Thanks to my mother-in-law. She's been teaching meditation for decades. I just really hit the lottery with that. So I do some meditation. And funny enough, I just talked with James Nestor, who wrote this epic bestseller. Yeah.
Breathe.
So, and the things that he's detailing that all the popular culture is getting to touch right now are things that I was doing that I didn't. He added another layer of understanding. I have a massive boost in nitric oxide. Little did I know from this humming meditation that she taught me. And I was just like, you feel like this kind of euphoric different experience, but I knew it was some chemistry change in my body, nitric oxide boost. So anyways, so I do some meditation. And then from there, I usually make my wife her coffee, and I'll usually have some tea. And she usually doesn't talk to me much until she gets that coffee. And the coffee that I give her is, again, it's organic. It's usually a combination of like some, medicinal mushroom in there as well. So like chaga, cordyceps, reishi, something like that. So it kind of helps even balance that with the coffee and the kind of quote acidic tendency there with these alkaline medicinal mushrooms. So we'll do that. Then I'll just get to work. I'll get to work. Oh, I left out. I also do a little bit of exercise. So maybe 5 minutes or something. Might be, quick kind of Tabata, go for a quick power walk. But then I'll just get to work. And then maybe 2 hours later, I'll actually hit the gym or, hit my equipment set up in the backyard, a la the pandemic, and do an official workout. So that's how my morning usually goes.
I thought that was a good morning routine. I don't think there's anything controversial there. I mean, that sounded great to me. Derek, I'm going to kick it back to you for one more, and then Shawn's been gracious with his time.
Yeah, one quick one, and this is just something that's specific that came across my desk, but I've been looking into, and I want to get your thoughts on this, collagen supplementation. And I've been dealing with like athlete tendon injuries and those types of things, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. And I think in the studies they're saying combine it with vitamin C. Have you had any experience with that, particularly like you talked about, disc problems and joint problems and all that? Would that be useful for general pop people who are dealing with these issues?
The thing about collagen, and specifically even with vitamin C, I'm so glad you brought this up. Folks are finally starting to really get this. Vitamin C, I think we just think about the immune system, but it's needed to, like, literally it helps to make new tissues, and collagen proteins, and, that's become massively popularized as well. But if we get into specifics there, and even with glycine, all these different things, not only do they help with the regeneration of tissues, whether it's bones, ligaments, muscles, skin, but also some of those amino acids in there are critical in regulating your sleep. Like I talked about before, like being building blocks of your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters. So, but again, these were things that we would get historically, by utilizing bone broth, by utilizing real whole foods. But now we can kind of get these concentrates to, kind of supplement our deficiencies in a sense. But in addition to collagen, I'm a big fan of MSM, methylsulfonomethane. So it's like, again, a building block. It really works well with vitamin C to help to kind of regenerate tissues. And yeah, I mean, there's so much there. Colostrum is another thing too. oh my goodness, like the stories that I've seen and heard, and the experiments that I've done with colostrum as well. Um, every growth factor in there, um, immune system regulators and immune system builders, because even our immune cells as well, we need building blocks to make our immune cells. And I got to share this, guys, with you being from New York, like, and going through what we've gone through recently. This is such an absent part of the conversation right now, is like, still, how do we get our citizens healthier? How do we become more resilient so that when the next thing comes, which it inherently will, how do we make sure that we're not as susceptible? Because, and I literally shared this a year ago, and now it's become popularized, but because I would go and actually, people are pointing people to the CDC if they talk about COVID, but I go to the CDC site and I talk with people who have connections with the CDC. The data is right there. This, a year ago, it was 94% of the folks who lost their lives with COVID on the death certificate had an average of 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities. Today, if people go to the CDC site, now that things have been stretched out over time, over 95% of the people who lost their lives with COVID-19 on the death certificate in association with SARS-CoV-2, over 95% of these folks had an average of 4 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities. It's right there in black and white. And yet, for some reason, we've just been focused on the less than 5% of people who are, quote, perfectly healthy. And even that comes into debate. Like, what is health in our culture today? But the bottom line is, we know that this is a massive, massive susceptibility. And what are we doing about it? We're doing nothing, which is what we've done, which for me, I was just like, okay, this is our opportunity. We're finally going to focus on this, because at the end of the day, we're all going to be exposed to things that challenge our bodies, that challenge our systems. And knowing that, having this, for example, the big three were, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity are really the big three. And we see this even with our healthcare workers. Another study done by the CDC, these folks who are working the front line, we know that this is probably going to be the biggest demographic as far as vocations to be hit by this. Yes, that's true. But what's not known is right there on the CDC site, 9 out of 10 of our healthcare workers that were hospitalized with COVID-19 had at least one pre-existing chronic disease. It's not 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, like, that's an interesting coincidence. 9 out of 10. And then from there, about 75% of them were clinically obese. We have to do something about this. We've got to get our citizens healthier, for whatever is to come. And so this is why, my mission, even with Eat Smarter coming out at this point in time, I had no idea this stuff was going to happen. But It's just really addressing, how do we make our citizens more healthy, make our immune system more robust and capable, because our immune system is literally made from the food that we eat. Every cell in our body is made from the food that we eat. It matters, and it matters more than ever.
Well, you said the word early on, and you said integrated, and I think that's really what this book talks about. When you go through it, when you read through it, the principles are so valuable and so, but, and this is not a knock, basic, but so overlooked, right? And then there's other things you're like, oh, wow, interesting. The microbiome, like you said, 30 years ago, paying no attention to that, right? And now all this research is pointing in that direction. It's why I honestly, and for everyone out there listening right now, I always like to recommend a book on my Challenger reading list. This is it. Read it. This is, in my eyes, becoming somewhat of the holy Bible of nutrition. Because I feel like if you can really, and it's never this simple, Shawn, Derek, it's never this simple. Learn this book, read it inside out. Take your time with it, reread it, keep it next to your bedstand. It's one of those things where I believe if you just keep digesting pieces of this and you slowly incorporate little things into your life, listen, a year or two can go by and you can find yourself in a completely different situation with a very resilient body, right? Resilient, because you said it, it will happen again. It's not if, it's when it happens again. And hopefully by then we're all that much more resilient and that much more powerful where we can fight off this stuff, unfortunately. So Shawn, do me a favor, tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find the book, your social media handles. It's such a pleasure.
Awesome. The pleasure is all mine, guys. Thank you so much for this. So folks can find the book anywhere that books are sold. We got an incredible campaign going with Target stores, which is really rare for a big idea food book like this to be featured in Target stores prominently, in its own display. But it just depends on when folks are listening to this, if a new campaign is kicked off. But so you can find it at Target stores, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all the good stuff. Support your local bookstores as well. And also, folks, where they're listening to this, they could find my show as well. It's called The Model Health Show, which I've got to get my guy back on there again. You're one of the really just like one of my all-time favorite episodes, because
I appreciate that.
This stuff, as you mentioned with Eat Smart, it really boils down to simplicity and making stuff make sense, and also just doing what's best for the person, which is not going to necessarily be what's needed for the next person. So it's called The Model Health Show. As you mentioned earlier on, very grateful to say it's been the #1 health podcast in the country many times over, because we bring on incredible guests, but also I do master classes on different subjects. So whether it is sleep wellness, we've got an episode coming out next week, I believe, on looking at clinically proven ways to optimize serotonin levels, but also a bigger story. We don't just talk about the one thing. Serotonin doesn't operate in a vacuum. So how does it all work? So, but really fun stuff. We bring it to life, make it colorful. And those are the two places people can find me.
All right, brother. Well, listen, we can't thank you enough. I'll be out in Cali in July. I'll definitely hit you up. Send my best to your family. We could have spent 5 hours on this episode. I know alone we could have covered a huge topic, which would have been sleep, and we could have spent the entire time on there. But I'm really hoping everyone goes and purchases this book, because it really is going to be life-changing. So Shawn, thanks again, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care, guys. See you, Dave.
Take care.